Whispers beneath the plum tree, a daughter's return to the house of secrets, where silence holds truths and the past refuses to stay buried. It had been 10 years since I left Seoul behind, yet the air still remembered me. As I stepped out of Incheon Airport, the cold wind swept across my face like a familiar reprimand. The city greeted me with the chill of early spring, the kind that sliced gently but unmistakably into your skin. I paused at the edge of the terminal, my suitcase beside me, the engines of 100 taxis humming like the ghosts of my past. I had spent a decade in Vienna, sculpting myself into someone new. But Seoul, this city, never forgets. The call came a week ago. Father's lawyer, his voice formal and untouched by grief, told me the estate needed to be settled. The word inheritance floated across the line, sterile and weightless, but I heard the undercurrent. I knew what it meant. He was gone. And yet I felt nothing. No grief, no tears, only the cold, familiar numbness that my father had always inspired in me. So I came not for him, not even for the money, but because something inside me needed to stand in the house I once called home and see what remained of the girl I had abandoned there. The taxi ride wound through a city that had transformed in my absence. Gleaming new buildings pierced the sky, while cafes and boutiques had replaced the family-run shops I once wandered past as a teenager. But beneath the glass and steel, Seoul's heartbeat was the same, restless, rhythmic, unforgiving. I passed by the school gates I used to dread, the streets where I had cried under neon lights, and the bridge where I had once thought of jumping. The estate emerged like a scar carved into the hillside. The Han family house was a structure of elegance and intimidation, all glass windows and stone facades, surrounded by a pristine garden that tried too hard to convince outsiders of warmth. Inside, it was as if time had held its breath. Not a cushion out of place, not a memory allowed to fade. The air was heavy, too familiar. The corridors whispered with the soft footsteps of house staff who bowed without ever meeting my eyes. They remembered me, I could tell. The quiet girl with too many questions and not enough answers. I moved through the hallways like a ghost revisiting the scene of her own disappearance. My room is untouched. The bed was neatly made, just as I had left it. The books on the shelf still in their dust-jacketed order. The window still looked out onto the plum tree that used to bloom just before exams, a sight I used to cling to in hopes that the world beyond these walls might offer something more. The mirror in the corner, though, that was the hardest. I caught my reflection and stared. Same dark eyes, same curve to the mouth, but everything inside had shifted. That girl was gone. The days blurred, meetings filled with clauses, documents, signatures, and formalities. Father's empire, a chain of real estate, legacy buildings, and government contracts, was now paper-bound and ready to be divided. But the paper meant nothing. It was the people behind it that weighed on me. I hadn't seen Ji-hoon in years. My half-brother, born of a marriage that had already begun to crack, had always been the favored son. He had my father's features, his rigid brow and his commanding presence, but none of his distance. At least, not toward others. With me, Ji-hoon has always been cool. Courteous, yes, but clinical. We had never fought, but perhaps that was worse. Silence between siblings is a deeper cut. And then there was Madame Han. Still elegant, still unreadable. She entered rooms like fog, soft but suffocating. Her face bore the same unaging beauty, her lips always on the verge of judgment. She spoke little, yet her presence demanded compliance. When my mother died, Madame Han didn't replace her. She erased her. She rewrote our family with perfect precision, one composed meal and measured smile at a time. I saw both Ji-hoon and Madame Han only at formal occasions, dinners arranged like peace treaties, meetings orchestrated by the lawyer, moments so tightly wound that even breathing felt like rebellion. And then there was Kang Han-ul, the journalist. He arrived on the second day, under the guise of interviewing the family for a legacy piece in a national publication. At first I didn't give him more than a polite nod, but something about him lingered. His questions were too precise, his gaze too calculating. He spoke of my father as though he knew him, not as a man, but as a myth he intended to dismantle. I barely remembered him from a fundraiser years ago. He had been a junior reporter then, eager and unimportant. Now, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen too much and was no longer surprised by secrets. We never spoke alone, but his presence unnerved me. Because sometimes, when no one was looking, he watched me. Not in a lecherous way, but like I was a puzzle he had already solved and was waiting for me to catch up. The estate grew quieter by the day. The servants began moving slower, as though waiting for something to erupt. Conversations in the halls fell silent when I passed. The walls had always had ears, but now they had eyes too. Watching, waiting. Something about the house was shifting, and I felt it in my bones. By the fourth evening, it rained. Softly, persistently, I stood by the window, the garden shrouded in mist, and realized I had not grieved my father because I had done so years ago when I left, when he refused to come to the airport, when he told me, running away doesn't change who you are. But maybe it had. Because standing in that room, in that house, I no longer felt the pull to fix things. I no longer craved their acceptance. The estate could be theirs. The legacy could rot. I had come for closure, but closure is a lie. We don't close chapters. We learn to live with the torn pages. Yet, deep inside, something told me this wasn't the end. Something had been left unsaid, something hidden, and I could feel it now brewing, silent and patient, waiting to be found. The morning after the rain, the estate woke in a hush. The air was damp with the lingering breath of the storm, and the windows bore streaks of fading condensation, as if the house itself had wept through the night. So-hyun moved through the halls with deliberate stillness, her steps echoing faintly against marble floors that remembered too many goodbyes. Something had changed. She sensed it not through spoken words, but in the way the servants avoided her gaze, in the subtle way Madame Han lingered a moment longer at the breakfast table before rising without a word, and in the flicker of unease in Ji-hoon's eyes during the morning meeting with the lawyers. There was something beneath the surface, something they all knew, something they had buried in silence. Later that afternoon, So-hyun wandered into her father's private study, a room she had never been allowed to enter as a child. The door, once firmly shut against her curiosity, now opened with a dull creak. Dust hung in the air like memory suspended. The shelves, lined with first editions and legal tomes, loomed with the weight of secrets. And in the center of it all stood his desk, polished to a sheen that seemed unnatural in a space untouched by affection. Drawers revealed letters, bank statements, and photographs, most expected, all clinical. But then, in a hidden compartment beneath the bottom drawer, she found it. A small, leather-bound journal. Its pages bore the erratic handwriting of a man trying to write himself into coherence. It wasn't a diary. It was confessional, a trail of fragmented thoughts and reflections. In it, her father wrote not about money or politics, but about legacy and regret. He spoke of So-hyun's mother with an aching tenderness that contradicted the man she had known. He wrote of mistakes he had made, alliances formed for power at the expense of intimacy. He admitted to secrets, some hidden to protect, others to control. There was one entry she read over and over, a date, a sentence, a name. The name was not hers, nor Ji-hoon's. It was a woman's name she didn't recognize. The name became an obsession. So-hyun tore through family records, photo albums, and old correspondences buried in forgotten drawers. The name never appeared again, but the feeling of its weight remained. Like a ghost tugging at her memory, she began to question everything she had believed about her family. Kang Ha-neul was still on the estate, and his presence became more pronounced in the days that followed. So-hyun noticed how he moved with purpose, how he never asked questions aloud anymore, only observed. It dawned on her that he wasn't here to write about her father's legacy at all. He was here because of the journal. Somehow he had known. Whether by rumor, anonymous tip, or old connection, he had come chasing the same ghost she now found herself haunted by. The journal held truths buried under years of lies, and Ha-neul wasn't just curious, he was invested. And so the estate became a stage. Ji-hoon watched her carefully now, his posture tense, his words even more measured. Madame Han floated through the halls with the air of someone who knew control was slipping. Conversations became riddles, dinners a performance of civility. Everyone waited for someone else to break the silence. It happened on the 6th night. So-hyun awoke to the scent of something burning. She rushed downstairs to find the study engulfed in smoke. The fire had not spread far and was contained quickly by the staff, but the damage was done. Her father's desk, the hidden compartment, and the journal were ash. No one asked who had started it. No accusations were made. But So-hyun saw the truth in Ji-hoon's guarded glances and Madame Han's unflinching calm. They had known. They had always known, and now they had buried the evidence. Yet the fire did not extinguish her resolve. It fueled it. There were still clues in the ashes, charred fragments of dates, a partial photograph curled at the edges, and a single golden locket that had somehow survived untouched. Inside the locket was a picture of two girls, laughing. One was So-hyun. The other was the girl whose name had appeared in the journal. She was not a stranger. She was familiar. Memories long suppressed returned in scattered images of childhood summers at a lakeside house, whispered conversations behind locked doors, and the scent of lavender and books. The girl was not a stranger at all. She was family. A sister. Illegitimate, hidden, protected, or erased. So-hyun collapsed under the weight of it. Her entire life, she had thought herself alone in her isolation, a shadow cast aside by a father who loved only his legacy. But he had loved once, perhaps, enough to shield a child from scandal, enough to give her a life far from the cold walls of the Han estate. And then, perhaps, he had tried to bring her back, and someone had stopped him. The truth clarified everything. The tension between Madame Han and her father, the silence that followed her mother's death. The peculiar kindness in Ji-hoon's early years had turned to coldness. The missing threads of a family portrait never completed. Seo-yun stood in the garden the next morning, beneath the plum tree now in full bloom. The petals drifted around her like snow, and for the first time in years, she felt the pull of something real. Not answers, not revenge. Closure. She would not stay. Seoul had taken enough. But she would not return to Vienna empty. She gathered the remnants, the locket, the photograph, and the surviving pages of the journal, and left the estate quietly. No farewells, no confrontations. The silence was her final answer, her closing line in a story built on omissions. Kang Han-no watched her go, his notebook untouched beside him. He did not follow. He didn't need to. The story had already begun writing itself.